Hey y'all, I'm Angie. Welcome to my channel where I do stuff. If you're new here, thank you for joining me, and if you're a returning subscriber, thanks for coming back. In today's video, I'm going to visit a grave in the middle of the road. I'm going to tell you a story about standing up for what you believe in, family pride, greedy developers, and how those decisions often negatively affect minorities. In 1879, at this location, a slave cemetery was established. After slavery was abolished, it became a community cemetery for the Black residents who still lived on this land. The burials continued until 1912, and here it sat undisturbed until 1947 when a developer bought all of the property. The developers began work on the neighborhood that you see here, but they forced all of the descendants of the people who were buried in this cemetery to find a way to get them unburied and reinterred in a completely different cemetery, all except for one, and that is how the story of the grave in the middle of the road, which belongs to Miss Hollie Tattnall, begins. Miss Hollie Tattnall was born into slavery, but she became freed. When she died in 1911, she was buried in the Black community cemetery, so just like the other burials, the developers expected her to be reinterred by her family. But they hadn't counted on the willfulness of Miss Hollie's children, who vehemently refused to move their mother's body. Trying to negotiate with Miss Hollie's family was becoming a thorn in the side of the developers and was costing them money every day, so they decided to just build a protective median around the tree and the grave and let Miss Hollie lie in peace. To celebrate their victory over the developers, Miss Hollie's children placed an additional plaque on the grave in addition to the headstone that was embedded in a protective concrete cover. And in 2007, the Texas Historical Commission finally recognized her lone gravesite as an historical Texas cemetery. Miss Hollie's grave is a tangible reminder to all of those who pass by here about what Texas slaves had to go through, as well as how many minority communities are unfairly targeted when it comes to being taken advantage of by a larger company wanting to make money. The marker reads, "Colored Graveyard in the Old Town of Hearne." This cemetery, now represented by a single grave, was a burial site for African American residents of the area. According to folklore, it originated as a farm or slave cemetery. The earliest known burial here dated in 1879, and residents used the graveyard until 1912. In 1947, developers purchased this property. Descendants of the interred were forced to move and rebury relatives. However, the children of Hollie Tattnall, died 1911, a former slave, refused to reinter their mother, forcing developers to build around her grave. Today, this single grave serves as a reminder of the area's early African American community and the sanctity of burial grounds. Historical Texas Cemetery, 2007. You may or may not be surprised to know that this is not the first, nor is this the last time something like this has happened in Texas. And I'm sure it happens all over the country. But in 1929 in Houston, the city of Houston decided to build their new hospital on top of the city cemetery. Now, they worked with the families and gave the families naming rights to the hospital, so they had the blessing of most of the families for the most part. But in the late 1970s in Crosby, Texas, a developer came in and bought up a bunch of old plantation land. Now, when the slaves were freed, they were given plots of land, and they had established a community, and they continued to live there throughout the years. So when the developers came in and started plowing down the wooden crosses and the other markers, the descendants came over and were like, "Hey, this is a cemetery. Our ancestors are buried here." The developers literally did not care and continued on. They built houses on top of the slave cemetery. And a few years later, one of the families was digging for an in-ground pool and they found bones. And so the developers ended up getting sued because they didn't disclose anything. They didn't even give the option to the families to reinter their ancestors anywhere. There was a really bad book that was sensationalized and written about that situation. And then there was also a movie that was based on the horrible book. And I can't help but wonder if Miss Hollie's situation caused some developers to make really, really bad decisions later because they didn't want to lose the money. As far as my research goes, there were only like maybe 4 houses that would have been affected had they chosen not to build them on top of the cemetery, but the developers just did not care. But before I get all angry about this, I'm going to go ahead and just cut it off here because we all know how Angie feels about land developers. I hate them. In case you don't know, I really, really hate them. Thank you for going along on this little trip with me. You could have been doing anything else today, and you chose to spend a few of those minutes with me, and it really does mean the most. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, then I hope you'll consider subscribing because I would love to see you back here next week when I do more stuff. Bye.